I'm Evelyn Hart, 68, a retired archivist. Most of my life unfolded quietly behind the cedar walls of the stone cliff villa my late husband Thomas and I built with our own hands. People in Monterey know me as modest, private, perhaps fragile. None of them, not even my son Andrew, ever knew the true worth of what I've guarded all these years. Tonight, at Andrew's wedding inside the glass-walled Cypress Grove Pavilion, beneath golden chandeliers and before 200 guests, that quiet life shattered in an instant. The quartet was still playing when Maya Reed Hart, my new daughter-in-law, stepped forward. The pearl comb glimmered in her hair, but her smile was razor-thin. Then, loud enough to drown the music, she demanded the fob key to my home. "Mother Evelyn," she said, her voice sweet but cutting. "It's time you pass the torch. The Hart Cliffside Villa, worth $15 million, is far too large for one aging woman. Andrew and I need it now." The music died. Cutlery froze midair. 200 eyes turned toward me. I heard the whispers ripple across the glass hall. Did she say 15 million? A villa? Her house? Her words sank deep. She had just asked for my life's foundation, as if it were a prize to claim. My hands trembled, but my voice held. "No, Maya, that villa is mine. It holds Thomas's memory, our history. It isn't yours to seize." I saw the flicker of fury in her eyes, the look of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. Before I could step back, her hand swung across my face. Not a slap, a true strike. The pearl pins shattered, scattering across the marble floor. That sound was louder than any church bell. Gasps rippled. My cheek burned, but the ache in my chest cut deeper. I staggered as every guest stood frozen. No one came forward. Even Andrew, my son in his tailored tux, stood rooted beside her, silent. He did not defend me. He did not move. Maya straightened her sleeve, unbothered. "Your era's over, Evelyn," she hissed. "Women like you don't need that much space. We do. Give us the key, and maybe you'll still have somewhere to visit." The room thickened with discomfort. Some guests pretended to sip champagne. Others lifted phones, hungry for scandal. Not a single hand reached for me. And my son, my only child, kept his eyes lowered. In that silence, something inside me cracked. The humiliation wasn't in the strike or the shattered pearls. It was in the collective stillness that followed. I bent down, gathering the broken pieces. My fingers trembled so hard, the shards nicked my skin. Blood dotted the marble. Still, no one moved. That image carved itself into me. Me, kneeling among scattered pearls, while the bride stood motionless beside her groom. And that was when I understood. This wasn't a wedding. It was a declaration of war. I rose slowly, my cheek burning, my dignity torn open. But as I straightened my back, a strange calm washed over me. For years I had hidden my true self, hidden the truth about my life, my choices, and my quiet wealth behind a mask of simplicity. Tonight that mask would fall. Maya thought she could humiliate me into surrender. She thought I was powerless, too fragile to fight back. She couldn't have been more mistaken. I walked out of the glass pavilion, 200 eyes drilling into my back. My old black leather clutch, scuffed from years of use, swung by my side. My hands still shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Julian," I said when he answered. My voice was low but steady, stronger than it had been in years. "Come to the pavilion. Bring the files. 1 hour, no more." There was a silence on the other end. "Evelyn," Julian replied, his tone grave. "Once we move forward, there's no turning back." I looked through the glass doors at the scene I'd left behind. Maya smirking beside Andrew, the hum of gossip vibrating under the chandeliers. "I've never been surer," I told him. 1 hour, Julian. Then they'll learn what regret truly feels like. So I waited in the night air, my cheek throbbing, my pearl hairpin shattered, but my mind sharper than it had been in decades. I waited, knowing that when Julian arrived, the celebration behind those golden doors would turn to tears. Before I continue, let me say this. If you've ever been humiliated, silenced, or made to feel worthless by the people you trusted most, Stay with me. This isn't just my story. It could be yours. And by the end, I promise, you'll know what it means when justice, even silent justice, finally arrives. The echo of Maya's strike still rang in my ears as the room behind me seemed to hold its breath. For one fleeting second, I thought someone, anyone, would step forward, that among 200 witnesses at my son's wedding, at least one hand would reach out. Instead, the silence thickened, pressing down on my chest. I scanned the glittering tables, the golden light glinting off champagne flutes, and saw nothing but eyes darting away. Guests fidgeted in their seats. Some lowered their heads as if the marble floor had become endlessly fascinating. Others covered their mouths, savoring my humiliation as though it were theater. Even the air felt heavy, as if the crystal chandeliers above had poured their weight onto my shoulders. My son, my Andrew, stood beside his bride, motionless in his tailored tuxedo. I searched his face for a trace of the boy who once clung to my hand when storms frightened him, who swore he'd never let me face the dark alone. Instead, I saw hesitation, fear, and finally, a quiet decision to say nothing. He adjusted his cufflink, turned slightly toward Maya, and in that single motion, he chose his side. My heart cracked in a way far deeper than the bruise on my cheek. Maya thrived in the silence, as if it were her private stage. She spread her arms, her smile widening, her voice rich with command. "This is only the beginning," Maya declared to the hushed room. "That villa will be the foundation of our life, our start, our home, our future." The way she said our villa, our start, stripped ownership from me, as if I'd been erased, a footnote in their new story. A ripple of whispers spread across the glass pavilion. I caught fragments from uneasy voices. Maybe she's too old for a place like that. $15 million, can you imagine? Wasted on one woman. Maybe it's better for the young couple. Each comment landed like drops of acid on my skin. My face burned, not from the strike, but from the public peeling of my dignity. I was no longer a mother, no longer a guest. I had become gossip, a topic for analysis, a curiosity to dissect behind half-covered mouths. I saw one of the bridesmaids lean toward another, whispering and nodding as though Maya's cruelty were practical, even justified. A man at the back shook his head slowly, but said nothing, unwilling to disturb the fragile order of the evening. Even the officiant, who an hour earlier had spoken of vows and faith, sat motionless, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. My humiliation had turned into communal entertainment, a scandal wrapped in silk and candlelight. Andrew finally moved, but not toward me. He brushed a bit of dust from Maya's sleeve, a gesture meant to soothe her, as if her act of violence were a minor embarrassment to smooth over. "Don't ruin the evening," he murmured, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Don't ruin the evening." As if my swollen cheek and shattered pearl pin mattered less than preserving the photographs. His words cut deeper than her hand. In that moment, I knew my son had chosen his wife, his new life, and left me standing alone among 200 silent witnesses. The music did not return, but the silence had its own rhythm. Each beat measured another pulse of abandonment. I could hear the faint clink of cutlery as someone nervously tapped a fork, the shuffle of shoes as guests shifted, avoiding my gaze. I felt like a stranger at my own child's celebration, an outsider at the table where I should have been honored. Maya leaned close to Andrew, whispering something that made him nod, his jaw tightening in agreement. Then, raising her voice again, she repeated, "This is the beginning of our life. That villa is where it starts. We deserve it." Deserve, that word echoed in my mind. When had I become a possession to be bargained for? My home turned into their dowry, my dignity reduced to an obstacle in their path. I straightened my back despite the burn on my cheek. My eyes swept the room once more, searching, desperately, for a flicker of compassion, for one person willing to stand between me and this storm. But all I found were glances, pitying grimaces that cost nothing, cowardice dressed as decorum. No one would risk discomfort to defend me. No one would challenge Maya's arrogance or Andrew's silence. And in that suffocating stillness, I felt the first spark of something rising inside me. Not rage, not yet, but clarity, sharp and undeniable. If no one in that room would stand for me, then I would have to stand alone. Their silence had declared me disposable. But my heart, though bruised, still beat with every memory of what I had endured, what I had built. And as I met Maya's gaze, her unshaken, self-satisfied smile, I knew this night was far from over. What she thought was the beginning of her life would soon mark the end of her illusion, that I was powerless. The silence inside the pavilion wrapped around me like a burial shroud. As I steadied my breath, memories flooded in from every side. Tonight's humiliation was sharp, but it wasn't the first cut. It had been building for months. Small wounds disguised as concern, quiet remarks that hollowed me out until I felt like air. Each memory returned now, vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The first was about my dress. I remembered standing in the foyer of Hart Cliffside Villa, waiting for Andrew and Maya to arrive for Sunday dinner. I'd chosen a navy blue dress, simple, comfortable, the one I'd worn for years. Maya's eyes flicked over me with a smile too polished to be real. "Mother Evelyn," she said softly, "you have such a timeless style, so timeless it feels like the 70s never ended." Andrew chuckled, uneasy, as if unsure whether to defend me. I pretended not to hear, smiled faintly, but the words pinned themselves inside me, a reminder that, to her, I was outdated, irrelevant, a relic haunting a house too grand for me. Then came the car. My 12-year-old sedan, steady and loyal, mattered more to me than its paint ever could. One evening, Maya offered to help carry groceries from the trunk. She ran her manicured hand along the faded surface, shaking her head. "It still runs? That's impressive. But really, Evelyn, it's not safe. A car that old could fail any time." Her tone was sugar-coated, but the message underneath was clear. I was frail, incapable, a woman who shouldn't be trusted to drive alone. Andrew nodded, echoing her false kindness. "Maybe we should get you something smaller, Mom. Easier to handle." I smiled again, though my hand clenched the paper bag so tightly it crinkled. I knew they weren't worried about me. They were auditing my life, piece by piece, calculating how long I could remain independent. The cruelest cut came when they spoke about my work. I've always loved the Hart Community Archive. Even after retiring, I worked part-time, shelving books, helping children find their first stories, guiding students through research that mattered. It kept me alive in ways money never could. One night at dinner, Maya leaned back, swirling wine in her glass. "It's admirable that you still work, Evelyn," she said, like someone observing a stubborn artifact. "But don't you think, at your age, it's time to enjoy life? Relax a little. Andrew and I can handle things from here." Her words hit deeper than she realized. She wanted me to step aside, fade into the background while she positioned herself at the center of my son's world. I began to see the pattern. Every kindness from Maya had thorns. When she praised my bonsai garden, she added, "You must be exhausted keeping it trimmed." When she admired the cedar staircase, she sighed, "So many steps for one person." She was rehearsing, laying the groundwork for a future where I no longer belonged. And Andrew, blinded by what he thought was love, absorbed every line like scripture. The sharpest memory came one weekday afternoon when I returned from the archive earlier than planned. As I turned into the driveway, I saw a sleek black car parked by the bluff. Two men in suits walked around with clipboards, pointing at windows and measuring the outer walls. Maya stood with them, gesturing toward the villa with the enthusiasm of a broker closing a deal. My stomach twisted as I pulled over, watching her hands outline the boundaries of a life that was still mine. When she saw me, her expression faltered for a second before she forced a polished smile. "Evelyn, what a surprise! These are just a few friends of mine, curious about the architecture." I didn't argue. I simply nodded, though inside I knew the truth. She had brought real estate agents to my home, surveying it as if it were already hers to sell. Later, I stood in the kitchen of Hartcliffside Villa, staring at the worn oak table where Thomas and I had once planned our future. The same table where Andrew had done his homework, where birthday candles had been blown out year after year. My palms rested on the surface, and it felt as though the life I'd built was slipping from beneath me, stolen not by strangers, but by the woman my son had chosen. Each memory piled upon the next until the weight became unbearable. Tonight's humiliation wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of every small remark, every disguised insult, every calculated act Maya had performed. She had been patient, peeling away each layer of my defenses until she could strike before 200 witnesses without fear of resistance. Andrew's silence tonight wasn't new. It had been rehearsed through countless dinners, through every conversation where he let her words pass unchecked. As I stood in that ballroom with my cheeks still burning, I realized those tiny cuts had prepared me for this very moment. They had warned me, even when I refused to see them. Maya's ambition had always been the same, to claim what was not hers, to turn my villa into the cornerstone of her own little empire. And Andrew, my only child, had followed her into that illusion, blind to the cost. But what neither of them understood was that every humiliation hadn't destroyed me. It had sharpened me. It had shown me the truth, that I could no longer stay silent, could no longer hide behind modesty. The villa was more than walls and windows. It was the last living piece of Thomas's legacy, the proof of a life we had built together. And I would not surrender it. A week before the wedding, Andrew came to the villa alone, holding a paper cup that left a faint coffee ring on the table Thomas had crafted. He set it down too carefully, as if politeness might soften the reason he'd come. Afternoon light glittered along the glass balustrade. He didn't sit. He paced the foyer like a potential buyer inspecting property. His fingertips brushed the molding, his eyes drifting across the portraits, as though they already belonged to him. "Mother," he began, his tone too gentle for the steel beneath it. "I've been thinking about space, about our future." He had once been direct. Now every syllable sounded rehearsed. I led him into the kitchen. The scent of lemon oil lingered, and the window framed the fig tree Thomas had planted when Andrew was 5. I poured tea. He held the cup but didn't drink. "Maya and I need a real beginning," he said, eyes on the ocean beyond the garden. "We've looked everywhere. Everything's too small or temporary. Your house, it's home." My throat tightened. "My house," I said. "It holds your father. It holds me. It holds you. That doesn't mean it's ready to be handed over." He flinched, the way people do when truth brushes a bruise. "I'm not talking about handing it over," he rushed, though we both knew that was the point. "Just sharing. A transition. Maybe you move for a while. There's a condo near the archive with an elevator and a doorman. Quiet, safe. You wouldn't have to worry about stairs or maintenance or being alone." "I don't worry about stairs," I said, "and I'm not alone." "You've done enough, Mother. You've carried this place for years. Maya and I are ready to build. We need freedom. You don't need this much space anymore." His voice didn't shake. Mine almost did. Freedom, in his mouth, meant eviction in mine. I set the teacup down and listened to the porcelain click. "It sounds like you've already decided what my life should look like," I said. "Did you come to tell me or to ask me?" "To ask," he said, but the word fit like a borrowed suit. "We just want a home where we can start a family," he went on, "where holidays feel full again, where our children can run through the halls the way I once did." "Children can run through rented halls," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "What you want is understandable. What you're asking comes with a cost you haven't counted." "It's not about money," he insisted. "It's about practicality. You're alone in rooms you never use. Don't you ever feel empty?" I glanced down the hallway where his height marks were still penciled on the doorframe. "Not to me," I said. He softened his voice. "You can visit any time. We'll keep your things safe. You'll have the condo and we'll handle repairs and security. Think of it as a release." "Release?" I heard Maya's phrasing in that word. Administrative. Bloodless. Is this what you want? I asked. Or what Maya wants? He hesitated, and the pause told me everything. Then he smiled too brightly. It's what we both want. It's sensible. It's time. I rose to rinse the teacup so he wouldn't see my trembling hands. Water rushed into the sink. Sense isn't the same as love, I said quietly. This house isn't a spreadsheet. It's Thomas's laughter in his study. It's the very brick where you learned your first notes. It's where you cried after your first heartbreak, I said, and fell asleep on my bed with crumbs in your hair. Memories don't keep a roof from leaking, Andrew replied, and they won't keep you safe at night. We faced each other across the oak table that once united us. Now it felt like a border. I was no longer speaking to the boy who once begged me to braid his hair. I was speaking to a man who had learned to wrap ambition in concern and call it practicality. He was my son, and somehow a stranger. He tried again, softer. I want you to be comfortable, Mother. The condo near the pharmacy and the archive, it's full of neighbors your age. If something happened at night, there'd be a concierge downstairs. If something happens at night, I said, I have a phone and a will. What I need isn't a doorman. Silence stretched between us. He set his teacup on the counter, aligning the handle with the edge. You'll think about it? He asked. I will, I said, because mothers learn to answer in ways that leave doors open without stepping through them. At the doorway, his gaze lifted toward the cedar staircase, the portraits, the sunlight spilling across the floor. There was hunger in that look, measured, possessive. He kissed my cheek and left. The small hybrid engine coughed to life, and I watched until his car disappeared beyond the curve of the bluff. The fig leaves outside trembled in the exhaust he left behind. Only when the villa swallowed the sound did I sit down, palms flat on the table, letting truth settle. My son had asked for my home as though it were a favor owed. He wanted me to trade memory for convenience, history for efficiency, love for logic. And I understood, finally, that there are gifts which, once given, can never be reclaimed. I wiped away the faint coffee ring and knew it would fade. What wouldn't fade was the boundary drawn that afternoon between his freedom and my belonging. I stared at the door he'd closed and felt something shift. My boy was gone. A stranger had taken his place. I left the glass pavilion that night with my cheek still burning and the cracked pearl pin clenched in my hand. The cool Monterey air brushed my skin, but it couldn't quench the fire rising in my chest. Through the glass, I could hear the murmurs again, voices resuming their rhythm, laughter returning as though my humiliation were part of the evening's entertainment. 200 guests had witnessed my disgrace, and not one had spoken. Even Andrew had turned away. I had been struck before them all, dismissed as though my life and my villa were bargaining chips on their table. For a moment, I leaned against the stone pillar by the entrance, letting its weight steady me. Then I felt something sharper than pain, older than sorrow, resolve. I reached into my worn black leather clutch, the one they mocked for its age, and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved over numbers I hadn't dialed in months, perhaps a year. I'd hoped I'd never need to, but tonight had changed everything. My hand grew steady, guided by memory. When the line connected, a calm, precise voice answered. Julian Park speaking. Julian, I said, and for the first time that evening, my voice did not shake. This is Evelyn Hart. I need you. There was a pause, the kind that falls when someone instantly understands the gravity of what's being asked. Evelyn, he said carefully, are you safe? I'm safe enough, I replied. But my dignity isn't. I need you at the Cypress Grove Pavilion right now. Bring everything, I said, the full portfolio. All property deeds, investment accounts, everything we locked away for years. 1 hour, Julian. No more. The silence on the line stretched, measured, cautious. You always told me to keep those files sealed unless you gave explicit instruction, he reminded me. Once this is done, there's no way to put the mask back on. Everyone will know what you've hidden. I glanced toward the glittering windows of the Cypress Grove Pavilion, where silhouettes still moved to the rhythm of the band, as if nothing had happened. I thought of Maya's smug smile, Andrew's silence, the whispers of strangers weighing what I supposedly deserved. My cheek throbbed, but my pride roared louder. "Then let them know," I said. "Let them see exactly who I am and what I've carried in silence, while they mistook it for weakness. I have nothing left to hide." Julian's voice softened, the way it always did when he set the numbers aside and spoke as a friend. "Are you certain?" "I've never been surer," I said. "For too long I've let them believe I'm powerless. That ends tonight." "Very well," he said. "I'll be there within the hour. I'll bring everything. But be ready, Evelyn. This will change the shape of your family forever." "My family changed the moment my daughter-in-law struck me and my son said nothing," I replied. "This will only reveal the truth." When the call ended, I sat on the cold stone steps outside the glass doors. The phone was still warm in my hand. The villa they coveted was only a fraction of what Thomas and I had built. What they called a grand prize was nothing compared to the foundation hidden beneath it. Thomas and I had chosen discretion for decades, letting the world believe we lived modestly while our investments quietly multiplied. We agreed that visible wealth was a magnet for vultures. Tonight, those vultures had shown their faces, and now it was time for me to remove my own mask. I looked down at the shattered pearl pin resting on my lap, its fragments catching the weak glow from the parking lot lamps. It was the last symbol of my disguise, the portrait of a widow on a fixed income, working part-time and driving an old car. That image had protected me. It had also allowed others to underestimate me. No longer. My mind raced through what Julian would bring. Bank statements that would silence their talk of poverty, titles to properties scattered across Monterey and beyond, proof of holdings far exceeding the $15 million villa they worshipped. Maya had dared to make her declaration before 200 guests. I had spent years mastering invisibility, but invisibility had become a weapon turned against me. Now I would wield truth as a blade. I could already imagine her reaction, the disbelief, the panic, the dawning realization that the woman she struck was the same one who had quietly shielded her and Andrew from the collapse of their own making. And I thought of Andrew, the boy who once believed the staircase of our villa was a castle tower. Tonight, he would learn that I was not the frail mother he imagined. He would see what it meant to have been the wife of Thomas Hart, not merely his widow. The minutes dragged heavy as I waited, cars gliding in and out of the lot, headlights slicing across the pavement. Each beam of light felt like the ticking of an unseen clock, counting down to revelation. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation. In less than an hour, Julian Park would arrive, and the illusion that had comforted Maya and Andrew would collapse. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt weak. I felt like a storm gathering its strength on the horizon, silent, but unstoppable. I rose and faced the pavilion doors once more. The music throbbed inside, muffled yet alive. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had stolen my dignity. But I had rewritten tonight. Within an hour, this celebration would no longer belong to Andrew and Maya. It would belong to me. I still remember the first evening Andrew brought Maya to Hart Cliffside Villa. It was a spring night, the air scented with lilac blossoms drifting through the windows Thomas had planted decades ago. I wanted the evening to feel warm and genuine, so I roasted chicken with rosemary and baked fresh bread, the kind Andrew had always loved as a boy. I set the table with our best china, the same plates we used for birthdays and holidays, because meeting the woman my son wanted to marry deserved care. When the bell rang, I smoothed my skirt and opened the heavy oak door, expecting polite awkwardness, a touch of nervous charm. Instead, I saw Maya. She wore a tailored cream suit that felt too formal for a family dinner, and her handshake was too firm, an attempt at authority rather than grace. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. What reached them was the foyer behind me. I noticed instantly, the way her gaze swept past my shoulder, tracing the staircase, the chandelier, the molding. It wasn't admiration. It was assessment. I'd seen that look before, on realtors touring the villa when Thomas and I once debated selling during difficult years. Their eyes would slide over the banister, the square footage, the craftsmanship, calculating value in silence. That was how Maya looked at my home. "Mrs. Hart," she said smoothly, stepping inside before I finished inviting her. "It's such an honor to finally meet you. Andrew's told me so much." She shook my hand, but her eyes drifted elsewhere, over the framed paintings, the antique clock Thomas restored himself, the gleam of the polished wood floors. Andrew followed, his cheeks flushed with excitement, unaware that his fiancée's admiration was aimed not at the atmosphere, but the architecture. During dinner, she was perfectly polite, complimented the food, laughed at Andrew's stories, even asked about the archive where I worked, but her attention wandered. When I excused myself to fetch dessert, I returned quietly and saw her standing at the foot of the staircase, phone tilted discreetly, as if adjusting something in her purse. Only later did I realize she was taking pictures. Her eyes moved from the fireplace to the French doors leading to the terrace, then back to me the moment she noticed I was watching. She slipped her phone away too quickly for the motion to be natural. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she said lightly. "You must spend a fortune maintaining it." I answered softly, but my stomach tightened. Thomas and I had always been careful, repairing what needed fixing, polishing what could shine, never flaunting the villa's worth. To us, it wasn't treasure. It was the backdrop of a life, filled with memory and laughter. But Maya wasn't cataloging sentiment. She was inventorying assets. I could feel the weight of her intent, even if I couldn't yet name it. Andrew beamed beside her, completely unaware. She spoke of their shared ambition, their plans, their careful future. And I, sitting across from them, smiled, quietly aware that a new kind of hunger had entered my home. She leaned into his arm, proud, certain she'd chosen right. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to dismiss the unease sitting in my chest, the kind that comes to a mother reluctant to let go. But every time Maya's gaze drifted from Andrew's laughter to the vaulted ceiling, from his gestures to the mahogany shelves, I knew my instincts weren't wrong. Later that evening, while Andrew helped clear the table, I saw Maya wandering toward the study. The door was slightly ajar. I caught the glow of her phone screen. She was adjusting the angle, taking another picture. The frame of Thomas's old desk, the shelves lined with leather-bound volumes that smelled faintly of dust and time. When she realized I was standing there, she smiled, calm as glass. "I was just admiring the decor," she said. "This place is extraordinary." I nodded, but my pulse quickened. Admiration was one thing, documentation was another. No true guest catalogs a home they claimed to respect. That night after they left, I walked through the villa slowly, fingertips brushing the walls. For the first time in years, I felt like an intruder in my own home, as if someone had quietly staked a claim with nothing more than a camera and a plan. Andrew called later, his voice glowing with affection. "Isn't she wonderful, Mom? She said she wants to build a life as stable as yours and Dad's." I listened, swallowed the unease, unwilling to dim his happiness. But deep down, I knew what he couldn't see. Maya's admiration wasn't for him. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for the life we'd built. It was for the villa, the gem she already imagined slipping into her hands. That was the night I realized my son had invited someone into our lives who didn't see family. She saw assets. And though I stayed silent, the image of her eyes sweeping the walls, the sound of her camera's shutter cutting through the dark, became the seed of a storm that would one day tear everything apart. They called it a family meeting. But the moment I opened the door and saw the leather briefcases tucked under Charles Bennett's arm and the glossy brochure peeking from Marjorie's tote, I knew it was an ambush. Andrew stood slightly behind Maya, his unease disguised as a nervous smile. The afternoon light spilled unevenly across the foyer. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I led them into the dining room, the table long enough to keep distance between us. It didn't help. They occupied 3 seats opposite me like a panel. "Thank you for making time, Mrs. Hart," Charles began, his tone formal, as if this were a corporate acquisition. He placed his briefcase on the table, fingers interlaced. Marjorie tilted her head in practiced sympathy. Maya intertwined her fingers with Andrew's beneath the table, a gesture meant to look tender. It felt staged. Andrew inhaled. "Mom, we just wanted to talk about the future." "Your security," Marjorie added, sliding the brochure forward. A silver-haired couple smiled from a sunlit courtyard above the words, "Luxury Assisted Living, where care meets comfort." "These communities have incredible amenities," Maya said smoothly. "Staff on call 24/7, fitness classes, chef-prepared meals." "And you'd be closer to town," added Charles, leaning forward. "No more worrying about stairs, maintenance, or strangers knocking late," Marjorie said smoothly. I glanced at the glossy brochure, then at my staircase, the one Andrew once climbed 2 steps at a time when he was little. "I'm not worried," I said evenly. Charles Bennett cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. Inside, color-coded tabs and a spreadsheet printed in immaculate type. "We've prepared a cost-benefit analysis," he began, as though generosity could be measured in margins. "With current market conditions, this property could move quickly. 15 million would be modest. I've seen 19 across the bay for similar acreage. You could liquidate, invest conservatively, and enjoy a stress-free lifestyle with professional care." He slid the paper toward me, tapping a highlighted line. "Average monthly expense for assisted living, $6,200. Very manageable." "Manageable for whom?" I asked. "For everyone," Maya replied smoothly. "You'd be cared for and comfortable. We'd have a foundation to start our life. It's a win-win." Her eyes flicked toward the French doors, measuring the terrace in her head, and I felt the temperature drop. Andrew tried to meet my gaze. "Mom, please, this house is too much. You're here alone. I can't sleep thinking you might fall on the stairs with no one around." His voice trembled on the last word, and for a moment I saw my son again. Then Maya tightened her grip, and the tremor hardened. "We toured a place near the library," she continued. "It's beautiful. You'd have neighbors, activities. You've always loved book clubs." Marjorie slid another sheet forward. "The schedule. Watercolor, gentle yoga, guest lectures. You'd make friends your age," she said softly. "And we'd handle all the real estate paperwork. The transition would be seamless." "We just want to make this easy." "Transition," I repeated. The word sat in my mouth like a coin of cold metal. "You're asking me to sell my home." Charles smiled the way seasoned negotiators do when they think they've found the weakness. "We're inviting you to make a prudent decision, while you're still fully in control." He paused. "Timing is critical." "Timing for what?" "To protect you," he said, letting the words hang. I set the brochure down and laced my fingers so they wouldn't shake. "What is this really about?" Maya's jaw twitched. "It's about building a foundation. This house is perfect for holidays, for children. It shouldn't sit half empty. We can honor the past while making room for the future." "By moving me out," I said. "By moving you forward," Marjorie corrected gently. "Think of it as a gift, for yourself and for them." She nodded toward Andrew and Maya, like a presenter unveiling rightful heirs. I looked at my son. "Andrew, is this what you want?" His eyes flickered. "I want you safe, Mom, and I want a home that feels like home." "You already have one," I said, watching Maya's lips tighten. Charles snapped his briefcase shut with a deliberate clap. "Mrs. Hart, you're clearly attached to this property. Understandable, but emotion complicates planning. If, heaven forbid, your health declined, decisions like this would be made for you." He leaned forward slightly. "In such cases, the court can appoint someone to manage affairs. No one wants that." I met his eyes. "Say what you mean." He smiled without warmth. "If your competency were ever questioned, a petition for guardianship is simple. We're trying to prevent unpleasantness." Andrew flinched. "Dad," he whispered, though he didn't pull his hand from Maya's. The room seemed to tighten around us. The chandelier gave a soft metallic click as it cooled, as if the house itself understood the threat. I felt the pulse in my throat, not from fear, but from clarity. They weren't asking. They were laying groundwork. The brochure wasn't kindness. It was packaging. The spreadsheet wasn't prudence. It was hunger. "I appreciate your concern," I said, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. "But my judgment is sound. My doctor says so. I'm not selling my home. I'm not moving." Maya's chair scraped faintly against the floor. "You're being stubborn for no reason." "I'm being loyal to my own life," I replied. Charles Bennett's smile thinned. "Then consider this a courtesy notice. Markets shift. People age. When decisions aren't made, the law fills the gap." He gathered his papers carefully, smoothing each page as though order itself could make his threats respectable. "We'll revisit this soon." Marjorie rose with him, pausing to rest a hand on my shoulder, a gesture soft as ash. "We care about you," she said. "Please don't make us care in more formal ways." Andrew stood last, eyes glassy, mouth pressed into the same hard line he wore as a child when refusing to cry. "Mom," he whispered, "please, think about it." "I have," I said, "and I'm still thinking." They left together, a practiced triangle, and when the door shut, the house exhaled. I remained at the table, palms flat against the oak surface Thomas had sanded one summer until it gleamed. I understood then what that meeting truly was, not a conversation, but a rehearsal for possession. I looked up the staircase, past the framed portraits and pencil marks of Andrew's childhood height, and felt something ancient and solid move within me. They'd come to make me small. Instead, they'd awakened me. Julian Park arrived just after sunset, the sky still bruised violet behind the cypress trees. He didn't use the front door. He came through the cedar side entrance, the one Thomas favored when he wanted privacy. He carried a thin leather case and the kind of caution that can be felt across a room. I switched on the brass desk lamp. Its paper shade cast a soft amber circle over the old cedar desk. The house was quiet enough to hear the clock breathe. "You asked for the full picture," he said, setting the case down. "No filters, no courtesy." I nodded, hands folded, ready to hear what I'd avoided naming. He opened the case and withdrew 3 folders. The first bore Andrew's married name. The second, Maya Reed Hart. The third, a neutral label that meant joint matters. Julian never dramatized. He never needed to. He began with the public records, a civil notice for late rent, a clerk's seal from county court, 2 overdue utility warnings. Then came the private files, ones I'd authorized months ago and told him to hold until I said otherwise. 5 revolving credit accounts, he said, tapping the summary sheet. Combined balance, $63,000 and some change. Minimum payments barely met. He slid the page toward me. Bank logos lined neatly in a column, interest rates rising like fevers. I asked about their apartment. He nodded toward the next document. Their lease at Bayview Lofts expired 3 months ago. The landlord filed a pay or vacate notice last Friday. They have 10 days from receipt. The word vacate felt like a small trapdoor opening beneath my chair. I steadied my breathing and looked to the third folder. Grace Turner arrived then, scarf looped around her neck against the chill, cheeks flushed from the walk. She had a gift for entering a room without adding noise. She slipped into the chair beside me and greeted Julian with the quiet familiarity of someone who'd stood guard at my threshold for years. "I spoke with a friend who manages Bayview Lofts," she said softly. "They've been trying to reach them for weeks. Packages keep arriving, designer labels, wedding goods, no payments." Her palm pressed lightly against the cedar table, grounding us in wood and fact. Julian continued, "The wedding itself, an unsecured personal loan, $80,000, taken 6 months ago. Maya's the primary borrower, Andrew the co-signer. 2 additional buy now pay later accounts cover vendors, suits, decor. Their end-of-cycle fees alone would make any prudent person wince." He didn't need to say Maya wasn't prudent. The ledger did that for him. He moved to income. Her commissions looked respectable on paper, but had fallen 3 consecutive quarters. Andrew's freelance work, the sporadic research projects, had never matched the champagne tastings and dress fittings she posted online. "They've been juggling obligations by pushing due dates," Julian said, "rolling balances forward, paying one card with another. The collapse has already started." The word collapse seemed to echo through the floorboards, as if the villa itself recognized the sound like distant thunder. Grace leaned in closer. "I also heard something you should know," she said. "Maya stopped by the leasing office 2 weeks ago, asking how to add a guarantor without informing them. My friend told her that's not how the system works." Julian glanced up, reading the question I hadn't voiced. "You asked for the full picture," he said gently. "This is the part you didn't want to look at." From the bottom of his case, he drew a thinner stack, statements from my own accounts, and laid them carefully between us. I recognized the transfers instantly. Monthly, punctual, polite as clockwork. "For 4 years," he said, "you've covered their largest bills. You've cleared both of Andrew's cards every quarter. You've sent rent support through a third party, so it appeared as promotional credit. You've paid an emergency dental bill, a laptop, and the lapse in insurance last winter." Grace's hand found my wrist. I didn't need the papers to remember. My body remembered the quiet clicks of late-night payments, the way I justified each one as a bridge to better choices, the relief in Andrew's voice when a crisis vanished, the way he never asked how it disappeared. "I thought I was buying them time," I said. "You were," Julian answered, "and someone else was selling it off." He turned another page. Maya opened a new credit line each time the old one grew heavy. When the wedding plans began, spending accelerated, venue deposits, photography, custom invitations. Image first, solution later. Grace's smile was sad but sharp. She could light up a room and leave a draft behind. I exhaled slowly, watching the lamplight pool along the document edges. Numbers don't lie, but they never tell the whole truth. The truth was in the pattern. I had been the invisible net beneath them, while Maya leapt higher, certain there would always be a place to land. She had mistaken love for infrastructure. Julian closed the first 2 folders and rested a hand on the third. "I can dig deeper if you permit it," he said, "but you already know enough. They're insolvent on every meaningful front, financially, morally, and humbly." He paused. "What you do next will shape everything that follows." I looked at the pencil marks on the cedar doorframe of my study, where Andrew's height had once climbed, half an inch at a time. I remembered him at 9, insisting we measure twice a week, certain that growth could be achieved through will alone. I thought about the afternoon he asked me to downsize my life, for his sake. I thought about Maya's eyes that first night she stood beneath the chandelier and calculated ownership, and I thought about the wedding loan, a debt destined to outlive the flowers. "I won't finance their downfall anymore," I said at last. The words weren't loud, but they fell like a lock clicking shut. "If they want a foundation, they can pour it themselves. I've already poured mine." Grace tightened her hand around my wrist once, then released. Julian gathered the papers with surgical precision. The hall clock struck the hour. Outside, the last trace of violet sky yielded to the indigo of night. Inside, the study felt solid again, as though every beam had quietly taken my side. The first to come to me was Lena Reed, her face pale, shoulders drawn tight, as if she carried a secret too heavy for her age. Lena, Maya's younger sister, 20 years old, still called me Aunt Evelyn, a polite title of affection, not blood. She was still in college, still carried that unspoiled honesty older generations bury beneath layers of diplomacy. She'd always been close to me, stopping by on weekends to help prune the bonsai or sit at the kitchen table with tea, listening to my stories about her mother and Andrew when they were children. That evening, she stood on the veranda, clutching her phone, eyes darting down the drive as if someone might have followed her. "Aunt Evelyn," she whispered when I opened the door, "I need to tell you something, but you can't say it came from me." Her voice trembled, and my stomach tightened before she even began. I brought her inside, closed the door, and motioned toward the living room. The lamplight fell softly across her face, and I saw how grave she was. Lena was not one for dramatics. She drew a shaking breath. "Last night, I was at the cafe near campus, the one where Maya's husband meets his friends. I was sitting with classmates when he came in with two men. They didn't see me. I was in the corner. I heard him bragging." My chest constricted. "About what?" "About you. About the villa." She swallowed hard. "He said it's practically theirs already, that after the wedding he and Andrew would finally live the way they deserve. He laughed about how big the bedrooms are, said he already had plans for the wine cellar. His friends congratulated him, like he'd just won something. He called it a $15 million ticket to a new life." I leaned back slowly, fingers gripping the armrest. The words painted a picture I'd glimpsed but refused to finish. Maya hadn't just dreamed of my home. She'd promised it, spoken of it, as if it were already hers to give away. Lena twisted her fingers together, voice nearly a whisper. "That's not all," she said. When they got up to leave, he stepped outside to take a call. I followed, just a little, not on purpose, but close enough to hear. He was talking to my mom. Her eyes widened, frightened. He said, "Plan A is still on track, but if she doesn't cooperate, we move to Plan B." My pulse pounded so hard I thought she could hear it. What did he mean? He said, "We'll have no choice but to prove she's no longer competent." Then he said, "We'll start the paperwork." The words struck like ice under the ribs. He said that to your mother? Lena nodded, eyes damp. I didn't hear everything, but I heard those words clearly. Plan B, paperwork, not competent. I don't know if she knew I was nearby, but she didn't sound surprised. She just told him to be careful. "Timing is everything," Lena's voice cracked. "Aunt Evelyn, they're planning to have you declared incompetent. They want to take everything through the court if you don't hand it over." I reached across and held her trembling hands. "You did the right thing," I said, though my own voice was unsteady. The air in the room felt thinner, as if the walls themselves were listening. Tears rimmed her eyes. "I don't know what to do. I love my mother, but I don't like what I'm hearing. And Andrew, he's different now, since Maya came into his life. He doesn't look at things the same way. I can't tell him any of this. He wouldn't believe me. But I thought you should know." I tightened my grip gently. "You've given me something precious, Lena. The truth before it reaches the courthouse. That matters more than you think." She looked down, ashamed. "I feel like I'm betraying my family." "No," I said firmly. "You're protecting it. You're saving what's still decent inside it. Silence is betrayal, not honesty." We sat together in the dim light, the weight of her words filling the silence. I could see fear in her eyes, but also courage. It reminded me of Andrew before Maya replaced his innocence with ambition. When Lena finally left, I walked slowly through the villa, touching the walls as if to remind myself they were still mine. But her words echoed with every step. Soon, Plan B, not competent. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was a strategy, polished into legal language, waiting to be turned against me. I looked out toward the dark garden where the lilacs shivered in the wind, and I understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't just circling like vultures. They were building the cage they meant to trap me in, and thanks to Lena's courage, I would be ready when they tried. The night after her warning, I couldn't sit still. Every corner of the villa seemed to breathe, memory and menace in the same breath. I moved through the rooms deliberately, my hand gliding along the polished banister, the cool marble of the fireplace, the heavy velvet drapes that Robert had insisted we keep, even when they'd grown old. They wanted to take this from me, fold me neatly into a brochure for managed care, and call it progress. But I knew what they didn't. This house, its beauty, its history, was only one piece of the puzzle. I unlocked the desk drawer in Robert's study with a small brass key I'd worn on a chain for years. Inside, beneath letters and old photographs, was the folder I hadn't opened in months, The paper smelled faintly of ink and cedar. I carried it into the study and spread it across the desk. Bank statements, investment reports, property titles, all meticulously organized by Julian. The villa, worth $15 million on the open market, was modest compared to the Harborview office tower Robert and I had quietly purchased 20 years ago when the city was still climbing. Today, that building generated $50,000 a month in rent from law firms and tech startups. There was also the Charleston Seaside House, a legacy property Robert had left me because he knew the ocean calmed me. And threaded among it all was the portfolio: stocks, bonds, international funds, conservative but powerful. The numbers stared back at me, unimaginable to anyone outside this room. I called Grace just after 9. Her tone was brisk at first, but softened when she heard the strain in mine. "Come over," I said. "I need you tonight." She didn't ask why. 30 minutes later, she stepped through the side door carrying a thermos of coffee and the quiet strength she wore like armor. I laid the documents before her. She let out a low whistle.
"They think the villa is the prize," Grace said, shaking her head. "They don't know it's only the surface." "That's exactly what I want," I answered. "They can scratch at the shell all they like. They won't see the structure beneath until it's too late." We spent hours going through the files, pulling out what mattered most: proof of solvency, proof of clarity, contracts I'd signed, investments I'd chosen wisely, a signed letter from my doctor attesting to my health, reports of my community work at the library. If they planned to paint me as fragile or unfit, I would counter with a record of responsibility stronger than anything Maya ever managed. Grace poured coffee and studied me over the rim of her cup, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "Do you realize what you're about to do? You're not just defending yourself. You're about to shatter their illusion right in front of an audience." I thought of the wedding guests, 200 of them, who'd watched Maya strike me and then chosen silence. They'd seen an old woman humiliated. Soon they'd see the truth. "They wanted a show," I said quietly. "I'll give them one." We built 3 stacks of documents. The first was for Julian to deliver to the ballroom: legal papers revoking all guarantor rights, formal notices of payment cancellation, and ledgers showing every silent contribution I'd poured into Andrew's life without credit. The second stack was for long-term defense: property titles, investment summaries, and certified health reports. The third I labeled private. It contained the letters Robert had written me, notes from our shared strategy to live modestly in the eyes of others despite wealth. He'd known greed eats from within. He would have wanted me to use that lesson carefully. By midnight, the desk looked like a general's war table. Grace leaned back, her eyes tired but bright. "Evelyn, this isn't just about protecting assets," she said. "This is about reminding them who you are, not the woman in scuffed shoes and cardigans. The woman who quietly built an empire because she knew power was safest when invisible." Her words made me sit straighter. For years I'd acted as if shrinking myself kept me safe, but safety had become erasure. The idea of reclaiming presence no longer felt like vanity. It felt necessary. I walked her to the door, the night air cool against our faces. "Tomorrow," I said, "everything changes." She squeezed my hand. "And tomorrow night, you'll sleep knowing you fought with dignity." When the door closed, I stood alone in the hall, the grandfather clock ticking softly in the quiet. I looked up at the chandelier, the same one Maya had stared at the night she first walked into this house, hungry for possession. I thought of Andrew's voice calling me selfish for holding on to a space he believed I no longer needed. And I felt something rise within me, not anger but resolve, sharp and steady. They'd mistaken discretion for weakness. Tomorrow, they'd learn that humility isn't the absence of power, it's the camouflage of it. I gathered the files back into the drawer, locked it with the small brass key, then carried the key upstairs and placed it on the nightstand beside Robert's photograph. The house exhaled around me as I turned out the light. Dawn would bring confrontation, but tonight was mine. The Harborview ballroom still glittered when I returned.
the chandeliers casting nets of gold over half-empty glasses of champagne and crumbs of untouched cake. The band had stopped playing, their instruments resting in uneasy silence, as if even the air was holding its breath. 200 guests shifted in their seats, murmuring in small knots, glancing toward the entrance like spectators awaiting the second act of a scandal. I stepped in with Julian beside me. His dark suit was immaculate, his briefcase balanced like a weapon he'd used many times before. Silence fell. Not the quiet of peace, but the charged stillness before thunder. Maya stood near the center of the ballroom, her arm wrapped around Andrew. They looked startled, like children caught sneaking out after curfew. Her bouquet trembled, petals falling like mute confessions. Her face twisted into a smirk the instant she saw me. "Back again?" she said too loudly, forcing a laugh that never reached her eyes. "Didn't humiliate yourself enough the first time?" I ignored her and kept walking, each slow step deliberate, the click of my heels drawing every gaze. Julian stopped 2 paces ahead of me, opened his case and withdrew a stack of documents. His voice cut through the air, clear and judicial. "Good evening. I'm Julian Park, legal and financial representative for Mrs. Evelyn Hart. Tonight, a few truths need clarification." The room tightened. Guests leaned forward, phones lifted discreetly, recording the moment as if history itself had paused to listen. Maya shifted uneasily, but before she could speak, Julian continued, "Effective immediately, all financial guarantees issued by Mrs. Hart on behalf of Andrew Hart and Maya Reed Hart are hereby revoked. The lease on their Harbor Lofts apartment, for which Mrs. Hart was the silent guarantor, is terminated. All outstanding debts are now their sole responsibility." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Andrew's face went pale. Maya tried to recover her poise. "That's absurd," she snapped. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I said, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. I moved closer, meeting her gaze head-on. "For 4 years, I was the invisible hand keeping your lives from collapsing. You thought the reduced rent was a miracle? You thought the credit cards paid themselves? You thought this wedding, tonight, was funded by your charm?" My words hung there, and murmurs spread like fire among the tables. Julian opened another folder, raising a summary for the crowd to see. "In the last 4 years," he read, "Mrs. Hart has provided a total of $210,000 in direct and indirect financial support to Andrew Hart and Maya Reed Hart. This includes $120,000 in housing aid, $48,000 in credit payments, $22,000 in insurance coverage, and another $20,000 for miscellaneous expenses." The numbers landed like punches. Guests began to whisper, some openly staring at Maya, others at Andrew. Vivian Reed, Maya's mother, covered her mouth with one hand, as if to block the words from entering. Andrew stumbled forward, his bouquet slipping from his hands. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Mom, did you really do all that?" I met his eyes, steady but heavy with pain. "Yes, Andrew, I did. I paid the rent when you called crying about overdue notices. I paid the card balances when Maya maxed them out and pretended she didn't know why. I even paid the deposit for this wedding, thinking maybe you'd remember who raised you, who loved you. Instead, you called me selfish, and you stood silent while your wife struck me." His lips quivered, but no words came. Maya, cornered, lifted her chin. "You just wanted control. That's all this ever was. You threw money around so you could own us." I laughed, but the sound that came out was sharp and bitter. "Own you?" I said. "You sold yourselves the moment you decided my home was your prize. You paraded me as a burden in front of 200 guests, demanded the keys to a house you never earned. I gave, Maya. You took. There's a difference." Julian unfolded another document, his calm precision almost cruel. "Furthermore," he said evenly, "the payment guarantees for this event, venue, catering, entertainment, have been officially withdrawn. As of tonight, the Harborview Ballroom is owed $53,000. Unless Mr. and Mrs. Hart can settle the balance immediately, management reserves the right to suspend all services." The band stirred uneasily. The manager, who'd been lingering near the back, stepped forward, papers already in hand, his face professional and grim. Guests shifted in their seats, some rising, sensing the celebration collapsing in real time. Maya lunged a step toward Julian. "This is outrageous! You're ruining our wedding!" "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "You ruined it when you chose greed over family. You ruined it when you conspired with your parents to have me declared incompetent, when you whispered about Plan B." The mention of Plan B rippled through the crowd. Lena, standing near the back, lifted her chin slightly, quietly confirming what she'd told me. Andrew's knees buckled, and he reached for Maya's arm, but she shoved him off, her face twisted in fury and humiliation. "You can't do this to us!" Andrew's voice cracked. "We have nothing without you!" The truth in his words was the first honest sound of the night. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to meet my eyes, not hers. "Then maybe you should have remembered that before you stood by and let her strike me. Love without respect is nothing. A marriage built on lies is nothing. And children who treat their parents as obstacles end up with nothing." The silence was so complete, even the chandeliers seemed to listen. The bouquet lay forgotten on the polished floor, its petals crushed under retreating shoes. Vivian Reed and Charles Reed looked ghost pale, murmuring to each other as the plan they'd built crumbled in full view of 200 witnesses. Julian closed the final folder and slipped it into his briefcase. "The matter is concluded," he said. "Mrs. Hart is no longer their safety net. The consequences from this moment forward belong to them." I straightened my shoulders. The sting on my cheek was only a faint echo of Maya's slap, but inside me, something fierce and immovable had risen. The silence fractured. A rush of whispers, a few gasps, the soft scrape of chairs as people began to leave. The celebration was over, replaced by the cold reality they'd tried so hard to hide. I looked at them one last time. My son, pale and broken in his wedding suit, and the woman he'd chosen, trembling with rage. "You wanted my keys," I said quietly. "But you never understood. I was the key." The ballroom manager stepped forward with a clipboard and the weary patience of a man used to cleaning up other people's messes. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "the payment authorization on file has been revoked. To keep the venue open, we'll need an immediate security deposit of $60,000, including taxes, overtime, and vendor fees. We can process it now." The band fell silent. Waiters froze mid-stride, trays suspended like punctuation marks. Conversations collapsed into a single exhale, then scattered into whispers that sounded like tearing paper. Maya straightened, as if an extra inch might buy her time. "Fine," she snapped, pulling out a black card. She tapped it. Declined. She swiped again, harder, as if friction could alter math. Declined. The manager turned the reader toward her, unhurried, polite. A second card. Declined. A third. Declined. The room's focus tightened like a noose. The bouquet still lay on the floor. Maya stared at the bruised petals as if they could swallow her whole. Charles Reed thrust out a silver card theatrically. "Try mine." The machine whined, beeped, declined. Vivian's hands shook as she rummaged through her purse. "We can write a check," she murmured. The manager shook his head. "Certified only." Guests began to stand. Chairs scraped the floor. A woman in navy whispered, "This is getting ugly," and slipped toward the door. The bandleader asked softly, "Should we continue?" "Wait," the manager said. Plates cooled. Servers retreated to the walls, witnesses at a trial. Andrew stumbled toward me, eyes wet, voice barely holding. "Mom, please, not tonight. People will talk about this forever." It was the small voice of a little boy who once couldn't find his shoes before school. Only this time, the missing shoes were the life he and Maya had built out of air. "This isn't something I did," I said, keeping my spine straight. "It's what you chose, when you stood silent while she struck me and demanded my keys." Maya turned, fury scraping away her polished veneer. "You wanted an audience. You crave control. What I crave," I said, "is the truth." The manager checked his watch. Sir, we have 11 minutes before we must suspend service and ask guests to vacate. Do you have a solution? Maya's hand trembled as she called her bank on speaker, begging for a limit increase, a hold removal, a miracle. The reply was polite refusal. The payment terminal sat between us like a verdict. Around us, the celebration dissolved. Couples reached for coats. A teenage cousin filmed until his mother lowered his phone with a sharp, "Shh! Enough!" The florists lingered near the archway, unsure whether to start dismantling the roses. Champagne dulled to flat gold. Someone began to cry, then stopped, ashamed of the sound. Andrew's knees buckled. He collapsed into a chair, palms pressed against his face, mascara streaking on his skin. "I can't breathe," he whispered. Reflex lifted my hand, the old muscle memory of motherhood. It hovered there, then fell. Love without respect brought us here. Comfort without truth would keep us here. Julian stepped forward with one last envelope. "A final clarification," he said. "Mrs. Hart has enacted a formal amendment to her estate plan, effective tonight. All assets previously designated for Andrew Hart are hereby transferred to the Golden Haven Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting seniors from coercion and financial abuse." The words moved through the room like a gust of cold air. Someone gasped. Another murmured, "Good for her." Andrew looked up, stunned, then broken. "Mom, you disinherited me." "I protected what your father and I built," I said softly. "I placed it where it can shelter those who have no one left to defend them. If one day you learn the value of respect and the conduct of love, you'll understand why." Maya laughed, crisp and hollow. "You're giving away a fortune to strangers." "I'm building a wall," I said, "between predators and the vulnerable, including the woman you struck tonight." 5 minutes remaining, the manager announced. Charles Reed gripped Maya's arm. "Call your uncle. Transfer the funds." She dialed, pleaded, listened, and her face drained of color. Andrew stared at me like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, reaching for a rope that wasn't there. "Please," he whispered. "Help us. I'm sorry. We'll fix it. She'll apologize." "Apologies aren't currency," I said, "and they can't repair what was done in front of 200 witnesses." The manager raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, without payment, we must conclude the event. Please proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion." The band packed their instruments. Servers cleared tables in practiced silence. The lights seemed brighter, as if daylight had broken into a dream and found it unworthy. Maya turned to me one last time, rage burning away what remained of charm. "You'll regret this." I looked past her to Andrew, shaking at the threshold where guests filed out with the weary grace of theatergoers leaving after a fire alarm. "No," I said, "I'll remember this, and so will you." Security held the doors. The room emptied, leaving only family, staff, and the wreckage of a celebration. I turned to Julian and nodded. He closed the briefcase. The last song of the night was the dry clack of the manager locking the cash drawer. Somewhere outside, an engine started and the evening went on, without us. I drew a long breath, lifted my head, and stepped toward the future I had chosen for myself. By morning, the tabloids had already pounced. No apology could erase the photos. Front pages showed Maya Reed Hart mid-gesture, face twisted in fury, while I stood opposite Julian Park, calm, beside me. Another shot captured Andrew, mascara smeared, collapsed in a chair as guests streamed for the exits. The headlines were merciless. Millionaire mother humiliated at son's wedding. High society couple exposed in mansion scandal. Groom in tears as family fortune vanishes. This time, the cruelty wasn't aimed at me. It found its mark in them. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, a ritual I'd kept for decades. Outside, the garden was still. Dew clung like glass beads to the roses Robert once planted. I read the articles with a detached calm, as if they were case studies rather than fragments of my life. Each paragraph told the same truth. Maya and Andrew had lived far beyond their means, their debts hidden only by the quiet lifeline I'd supplied. Now, that line was cut. By noon, reporters had camped outside their Harbor Lofts apartment. Neighbors confirmed that an eviction notice had been posted. Clips went viral of Maya shouting at the property manager, voice cracking in desperation as movers carried boxes to the curb. Andrew was photographed clutching belongings, his designer suit stuffed into a trash bag. The world watched their collapse, each frame stripping away the illusion they'd spent years constructing. I didn't laugh, but I didn't cry either. There was a hollow clarity in watching justice unfold without my hand in it. I'd made my choice and stepped aside. The consequences belonged to them. By midweek, creditors moved fast. The wedding vendors filed lawsuits for unpaid invoices. The bank reclaimed Maya's leased convertible, that gleaming proof of success. Her boutique credit accounts were frozen, her lines of credit slashed. The invitations that once arrived daily evaporated overnight. Friends who'd toasted her ambition now sipped their champagne elsewhere, but the sharpest blade cut within their own family. Charles Reed and Vivian Reed, who once sat in my parlor discussing retirement homes and responsibility, found themselves cornered by the contracts they'd co-signed. To secure Maya's loans, they'd guaranteed tens of thousands in debt. With her default, the burden rolled straight onto them. Their names appeared beside hers in court filings, their reputations shredded under the very spotlight they once courted. Through Grace Turner's measured updates, I learned that Vivian had broken down at a bridge club luncheon when someone asked, "How could you treat Evelyn like that?" Charles, proud and loud, had no defense. Colleagues whispered behind his back, wondering how a man so eager to lecture me on judgment had none for his own daughter. As for Maya, her job offers dried up like puddles under the Charleston sun. No firm wanted to touch the scandal. The footage of her outburst at the wedding looped endlessly online. A cycle of humiliation captioned with mockery. Comments piled up. Parasite, spoiled brat, a coward in heels. Andrew fared no better. His attempt to start a consulting firm folded within days. No one wants advice from a woman whose own image has been torn apart in public. Through it all, I stayed silent. I tended my roses, I kept my afternoons at the library, I held on to the rhythm of modest habits. People asked if I felt vindicated. The truth was more complicated. Vindication carried a note of celebration. What I felt was colder, a certainty that balance had finally been restored. One evening, while watering the hydrangeas, a neighbor paused at the gate. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I saw the news. You handled it with grace. They deserved it." I thanked her, but the compliment slid off me. This was never about deserving. It was about cause and consequence, choices and their weight. The phone rang less each day. Andrew tried once, his voice trembling on voicemail. "Mom, please, we're ruined. We need help. I promise it'll be different." I didn't call back. He'd stood by while Maya struck me, echoed her demands, let my dignity be trampled for his convenience. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Julian stopped by a week later with final documents, closing the last of my financial ties. He set them neatly on the table and looked at me with quiet respect. "It's done," he said. "They're on their own now." I poured us tea. "That's always been their burden," I said. "I just delayed its weight." The scandal burned in the headlines for weeks, then months. Each title a reminder of how fast masks fall when truth is exposed. Strangers stopped me at the market, at church, even on the sidewalk, telling me I'd given them courage. Stories poured out of them. Parents pressured for money, children demanding houses, elders threatened with abandonment. I listened, recognizing shards of myself in every confession. I wasn't triumphant, I wasn't vengeful. I simply lived more quietly and more firmly, knowing the storm had passed and left me standing. The downfall of Maya and Andrew was never my victory. It was their own making. I merely stopped shielding them from the mirror they'd refused to face. And in that reflection, for the world to see, their empire of deceit turned to ash. 6 months later, I woke before dawn. The house felt different. No longer shrinking like a fortress, but unfolding like a harbor. Inside, the quiet belonged to me again. The wedding video had spread farther than any rumor our town had ever known. Millions had watched the slap, the silence, the moment Julian's documents turned music into judgment. I'd feared attention, but what came wasn't ridicule. It was testimony. Letters arrived from farms and high-rises, from parishes and mobile homes. Parents described the gentle pressure that hardened into a vice, for your safety, for efficiency, for the good of the family. And producers from a national program, Stories That Matter, invited me to speak. Under studio lights, I wore a navy jacket and spoke the unvarnished truth. Julian sat beside me, explaining the law, what a guarantee meant, what competency truly was, how guardianship could twist when control disguised itself as care. Grace Turner and Lena Reed watched from the front row, their faces steady as anchors. When the episode aired, more messages came. Emails typed at midnight, handwritten notes, voicemails that began with apology and ended with relief. With Julian's guidance, I filed the papers to establish the Golden Haven Foundation. We rented a modest office near the courthouse, so frightened clients wouldn't have far to walk. Grace answered the phone herself through the first month. The Golden Haven Foundation, Grace speaking, that's what she says now. And on the other end of the line, a stranger's voice breaks, because someone decent has finally answered. Lena built our intake forms and a simple website with one bright button. Tell us what happened. Within weeks, our calendar was full. We helped a retired mechanic reclaim the title his grandson had forged. We secured a restraining order for an elderly woman whose son pounded on her door every payday. We untangled a bank account drained for years by a caretaker's borrowed trust. I led workshops at the senior center. Julian trained volunteer lawyers. Grace and Lena organized rides so no one had to face a hearing alone. In every room, I repeated the same line until it felt like breathing. Love without respect isn't love at all. Sundays changed shape. I cooked again, not because anyone expected it, but because cooking felt like a prayer made of heat. Grace brought lemon bars that always disappeared first. Lena brought laughter that washed weakness from the rafters. Julian brought flowers, he said, from grateful clients. And case notes, neatly clipped. We played cards after dinner, argued about nothing. One night I realized the ache that once lived under my ribs had quieted. It turns out family can be chosen. News of Andrew reached me indirectly. He was expecting a child. I sat with that sentence a long time, its warmth and its sting. He sent one text, a single black and white image, and 5 words. Thought you should know, Mom. No apology. No mention of the night he stood silent while Maya struck me. No recognition of the months that followed. I set the phone down and walked the hallway, running my hand over the pencil marks where he once insisted on measuring himself twice a week. I asked Julian to create a small education trust to activate on that child's 18th birthday. No conditions, no announcements. He raised an eyebrow, then nodded. I told him it was a promise for the future, not a leash for the present. He drafted the papers, and I signed them with a steady hand. It was the first gift I'd given my family that didn't require me to disappear. Strangers still ask what justice feels like. It feels like the first breath after a storm. You can still smell the rain, but you're no longer drowning. They ask if I regret anything. I regret the years I mistook protection for love, and the silences that let others paint the smallest version of me and call it accurate. I don't regret the words I said in that ballroom. Enough. They hold me steady like a railing on a dark staircase. This morning, a letter arrived from a state senator who'd seen the broadcast and wanted to meet to discuss stronger protections for elders coerced by family. I fed the roses first, then called Grace. We're going to the Capitol, I said. Wear the navy jacket, she told me. You look most like yourself in it. I laughed, surprised by the freedom of the sound, and realized that laughter itself is proof. After lunch, I walked the garden paths Robert once laid by hand. The fountain murmured. The fig tree poured its long green thoughts into the breeze. I set a chair in the shade and read 2 letters, then one more, stopping before their sorrow pulled me under. I'm learning the discipline of sealing envelopes. of saving part of myself for tomorrow. Healing isn't a performance, it's a practice. As dusk fell, the house settled like a good book at the end of a chapter, quiet, certain of its nature. I stood by the window and thought of the boy I'd raised and the man he became. If he ever came to the gate with a full apology, not carved from panic or need, I'd meet him there. Until then, I keep the porch light on for my own sake, so I can find my way back in if the night grows loud. 6 months later, the house is still mine. But more importantly, I am mine. I lock the door, whisper thanks for a life survived, and trust the road ahead to the courage that found me when the music stopped. 2 years have passed since the night the music stopped at my son's wedding. Time softens the edges of pain, but sharpens some truths until they gleam like glass in the sunlight. I'm 71 now. I've lived long enough to know that survival is not the same as peace. What happened that night left a scar, but it also opened a path, and I chose to walk it. The estate, once shrunken in their eyes to a prize to be claimed, has become something else entirely. I still live within its walls, but the house no longer feels like a fortress. It breathes with me. Each room is a testament, not to wealth, but to dignity reclaimed. When I pass through the front hall, the high windows and familiar scent of polished wood remind me that the home Robert and I built was never about bricks or chandeliers. It was about standing firm, protecting what we love, and refusing to be erased. In these 2 years, the Golden Haven Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. We have offices in 3 cities, a hotline that never goes unanswered, and a team of lawyers, social workers, and volunteers who've helped more than 500 elders reclaim what was stolen from them. Homes signed away under pressure, savings drained by manipulation, wills rewritten by deceit. Each case echoed pieces of my own story, and every victory stitched one more seam into the quilt of collective strength. I have traveled farther than I ever expected at my age. Conferences in Washington and Chicago, state hearings, church basements, senior center halls. At first, the lights and microphones unsettled me, but I learned that people don't come for polished speeches. They come for truth. They come to see proof that someone like them can stand up, even late in life, and say no more. Each time I told my story, the weight grew lighter, not only from me, but from those listening. Grace is now Director of Outreach at the Foundation. Her calm strength is why so many callers who dial in trembling find the courage to walk through our door. Lena, no longer the shy student, has become an advocate in her own right, using her voice to reach the young, to teach them that respect isn't optional. It's the ground beneath everything. Julian, still precise to the decimal, keeps our finances airtight, reminding me that transparency is armor for trust. Together, they are more than colleagues. They are the family I chose, and who chose me back. As for Maya, we remain distant. She has a son now, my grandson, but she's never come with the words that matter. Letters arrive, yes. Requests for help, for money, circling the truth without entering it. I answer with silence. My love for her as my child endures, but love without accountability turns into a shackle, and I will not wear it again. Someday she may come, not for rescue, but for reconciliation. Until then, I wish her peace from afar. In the stillness of the second winter after that night, I began to write. Not speeches, not letters, but a book. It started as notes on yellow pads stacked across my desk, stories of the people we'd helped, reflections on what dignity means when the world tries to strip it away. Julian urged me to send the manuscript to a publisher. Grace said it could help more than a single voice ever could. Lena said simply, "People need to know you're not alone, Aunt Evelyn." The book was released last spring under the title Dignity and Domestic Betrayal, A Survivor's Journey. I expected modest sales, perhaps a few libraries placing it quietly on their shelves. Instead, it became a national bestseller, translated into 3 languages, taught in university ethics courses, discussed in support groups I'd never heard of. Readers wrote to me saying it gave them the words they'd lacked for years. Some underlined entire passages and mailed back their copies, asking me to sign them, so they could carry those pages as armor. Sometimes I pass through the library of the estate and see piles of letters from strangers, thanking me for giving them permission to stand tall. The irony isn't lost on me. The house Maya once tried to seize as a symbol of wealth has become the backdrop for a movement rejecting that very idea. It was never the marble floors or chandeliers that mattered. It was the story contained in these walls, that a woman underestimated and dismissed chose not to surrender. Peace has settled into my days like sunlight through lace curtains. I wake early, tend the roses, brew tea, read without hurry. In the afternoons, I mentor younger advocates who remind me of myself before I understood my own strength. Evenings belong to friends gathered around the table, their laughter softening the old house. When I sit alone afterward, I don't feel lonely. I feel whole. If these 2 years have taught me anything, it's that dignity is not something given. It's claimed, defended, and nourished. Wealth can be stolen, homes can be taken, reputations can be smeared. But dignity, once embraced, cannot be destroyed. That is what I carry now. That is what I leave behind. When I close my journal tonight, the city lights shimmer in the distance and the estate rests around me. I'm no longer defined by what was almost taken, but by what I chose to keep. And what I chose was not merely survival, but a meaningful life built on the unshakable foundation of respect. The house still stands, but more importantly, so do I. A living testament that even after betrayal, there can be rebirth. And even after loss, there can be peace.